You cannot have expectations from people who are contributing as volunteers. But vast majority of open source projects do not have volunteer contribution. They have contributions during paid time of companies who depend on those projects.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 144. Is open source sustainable? Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. There was a post by Filippo Valsorda. Filippo, if you listen to this, I ask for forgiveness for completely butchering your name. And the post was titled, Professional Maintainers, a Wake-Up Call. And this post sums up a lot of feelings about open source. It goes into a number of things. Obviously, there was the big Log4j thing that happened at the end of last year. And he talks about a couple of other situations where there were high numbers of stars on GitHub and had only raised $40. And you may have seen the XKCD comic about all of these things that are built, and it points at the one little piece at the bottom that if somebody just came along and kicked it, the whole thing comes tumbling down. How long is open source really going to be viable?
Forever. I think that for an open source project to be successful, not always, you need to have a commercial successful entity above it. You need to have a business on top of open source for open source to be successful. And I know that some people are now start throwing stones at me saying that you're commercializing open source, but I do believe that behind significant percentage of successful open source project, there is a commercial interest. And that's okay, that's good, because for a project to be successful, you need to have people dedicated to that project. And for people to be dedicated, you need to feed those people, right? I mean, if you look at Jenkins, Ansible, Terraform, Kubernetes, I'm throwing now random projects that I know. There is always a commercial interest behind those projects. And when you have commercial interest, then things become fair, because you can use open source. It's free. There's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly valid, and people should use open source directly. But then you be prepared to fix your issues in those projects. If you're not ready for that, then you buy a commercial version of that project where you have a company fixing those issues for you. What you cannot do, I mean, you can, but you shouldn't do. It's really not good, and it freaks me out when people complain, hey, Log4j has a problem. Go and fix it. You have two real options. 3, you can complain, but that doesn't get you anywhere. You can go and fix the problem that you are experiencing, make a pull request, and I'm pretty sure that one of those 3 or 4 contributors would gladly merge your fix to that issue. Or you can use a commercial version of that something, and then you have a company doing the contributions in your name. Effectively, that's what commercial open source is.
But one of the things that Filippo calls out is that the status quo is unmaintainable, or actually unsustainable. Most maintainers fall into one of 2 categories, and I'm quoting this right now. Volunteers or big company employees. Sometimes both, but then he states that neither model is healthy. Volunteers are doing it in their spare time. I put in pull requests for a number of different projects in my spare time. I don't get paid for that as part of my day job. But then the other side of it is, if you're looking at, and he calls out some very interesting numbers here, as a senior software engineer, looking at the 90th percentile of these salaries can be anywhere from 150 to over 300,000 a year. The one project they had called out for UA Parser JS, $41 for the year. Right? Neither of these are sustainable.
That form is definitely not sustainable. I mean, it is actually sustainable, but you cannot have expectations from people who are contributing as volunteers. But vast majority of open source projects do not have volunteer contribution. They have contributions during paid time of companies who depend on those projects. Like, take a look at Kubernetes. Vast majority of pull requests, contributions to Kubernetes come from people working in Red Hat, in Microsoft, in Google, in small companies, big companies. And those PRs are rarely because, hey, I woke up this morning and I'm going to contribute this. No, they're, hey, my company needs this. Like, recently we contributed, the company I work in contributed fix to one of the issues in kubectl and Kubernetes API. And why did we do that? Because it affects the product we're building. So those contributions were made not because of random reasons, but because we depend on that project. It's an open source project. Kubernetes is an open source project. We depend on it. There is a problem that affects us. We fix it during work time. Jenkins is a good example as well. Many of the plugins come from companies who have strong interest in those plugins. Not all, I'm not saying that. But SonarQube is having plugins and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah, because they want to be part of that ecosystem. So they spend time creating the plugin for, in this case, Jenkins. We could say the same thing for Terraform. Companies create modules that can be consumed by Terraform, which helps grow the ecosystem, but that also puts a strain on the ecosystem because people that then, it's like, oh, now I've got this module for Terraform. Oh, I've got this plugin for Jenkins. People using that don't think about day 2 or day 5 because just because somebody created a module, a plugin, doesn't mean that they're going to be maintaining those pieces, but the core that uses those things is going to keep moving forward. Jenkins is going to keep moving forward. Terraform is going to keep moving forward. And if you've based a lot of whatever your institutional knowledge is on that module, on that plugin, and it's been abandoned, you've now put your business at risk, especially if you're not willing to maintain it.
Forget that it is open source for a second. It's unreasonable to expect that you do not put effort in your business. It's your business, you put effort into it. And if that business happens to depend on open source, then you put effort into making sure that works. And you're using that open source project simply because it is less effort for you to use that project than to write it yourself from scratch. What is ridiculous is to say, hey, I depend on this open source project and it's a strong dependency and my business depends on it and so on and so forth, but I'm just going to use it. I'm not going to fix the issues that are affecting me. Again, I'm not saying from the goodness of my heart. I'm saying from purely selfish interest and motivations. I have an issue with that project and I'm not willing to fix it and I'm not willing to pay anybody to fix it. I mean, business cannot be sustained by like that. So to me, the problem with open source is not open source itself. It's problem of business expecting that business will continue existing, your own business, without putting effort into it.
And this leads into one of the other sections of this post is, and I'm quoting again, companies are in the business of getting what they need by paying invoices. They don't get what they need by paying their law firm on Patreon or making a donation to an open collective or a GitHub sponsor. They're used to paying invoices. The model of this around SQLite, and we've talked about SQLite on either a DevOps Paradox or a DevOps Toolkit live stream. You want support for SQLite? Great. You can get an invoice from them, and they'll gladly send you an invoice. And you get a support contract. You can get that. But again, companies are used to paying invoices. They're used to making donations when it's, let's go get some backpacks for kids for school. That's how they think in donations. They don't think in donations for software. They think in invoices for software.
I suggest that really, if there is, for open source projects that are not under anybody's umbrella, the primary maintainer should gather and form a company behind it and charge real invoices for it instead of accepting donations. And I know that some people will say that's not in the spirit of open source, but I disagree. I think it's very much in spirit of open source. Charge for support for that project. Prioritize fixing issues that are from your customers. You need to eat, I need to eat, everybody needs to eat and have a roof over our heads. Nobody works for free.
Say that last line again.
About roof?
About nobody eats for free.
Yeah, you don't eat for free. I mean, somebody does eat for free, but that's not the goal. Nobody eats for free. We all need money to pay our bills. And it's perfectly fine that, many of us, I know that you do and I do as well, we contribute outside of our working hours, outside of the businesses we work in. But those are sporadic contributions. That's not how you sustain a project. You sustain a project by having finances to do that, by having people dedicated to a project, not run at random times, at random moments, random whatever. Dedication is the key to success of any project, no matter whether it's open source or closed source. And we like open source not because it's free. I think that that's the issue. The appeal of open source is that there is more than one entity that has interest in it. Going back to Kubernetes, Kubernetes is amazing open source project, one of the biggest ones, if not the biggest one in the world. It became so big because there is mutual interest shared by many companies in the success of that project, not because of volunteering.
Do you believe one of the reasons why Kubernetes beat out Mesos is because of all the big companies getting behind it?
It beat both Mesos and Docker Swarm and Nomad simply because the other three, Nomad, Mesos, Docker Swarm, were under umbrella of a single company without having a clear incentive for others to contribute to it. Now, I'm not saying that there were no contributions to those projects. There were, but not even close to the scope of contributions that were pouring into Kubernetes. And the major difference is that many more entities had interest in contributing, not because there were more nice people in one project over the other.
I'm thinking about a fictional company that has decided to go ahead and go all in on open source and use only open source projects. Big difference between projects and products. Fictional company has decided to use open source projects to power everything. And this is not a customer-facing company, or meaning it's not a SaaS, it's not anything. It's just it could be a financial services company, it could be a healthcare company, whatever.
And there are many companies like that.
There are. But what I'm saying is they've decided to stay with upstream Kubernetes. They've decided to stay with Jenkins. They've decided to only use Terraform without paying anything to HashiCorp, so you're not using Terraform Enterprise. They're just using open source everything. And they are unwilling to contribute in any way, shape, or form. And they're also churning their employees over about every 12 to 18 months. Where's that company going to be in 36 months?
It depends on the choices they made and how close they are to the edge. If you use big successful open source projects and you're dealing only with things that many others are dealing with, there is a strong chance that the issues that you will be facing were already faced by others and fixed by others, or features were created by others, and so on and so forth. So it really depends on how far you're going or how much behind you are, right? If you say Kubernetes, excellent. If you don't need advanced networking, then hey, it works fine. Everybody's using it already. And whatever you're facing, somebody else faced before you, and somebody else fixed it before you, because that somebody else cannot wait for you. So let's say that I'm 1 year behind you in my whatever I'm doing, behind you, Dario, right? You're the person who contributes because you cannot wait for me. You would need to wait for me to fix your stuff for a year, right? Because I'm 1 year behind you. So you're in front. You need to fix it. I don't. I'm behind. I'm just kind of like, what's that expression when you're running behind somebody and then you're having the advantage of not having wind slowing you down because it's actually you're behind somebody.
You're drafting.
There you go, drafting. And that's why there is very often that question, hey, how many companies are using this? How stable this is, and so on and so forth. Because for many companies, that's you just want to be a user of something. And that's perfectly legit, right? You're not coming up with anything new. You are not a leader in anything. That's fine. You just need to understand that.
It just seems so short-sighted because if you're using the upstreams of everything, that means you're having to deal with any of the problems. You're having to track down. You're wasting a lot of time playing technical shell game versus just having a supported platform from vendor X that then you can focus actually on your business instead of focusing on the technical issues that you're having to deal with on a daily basis. It just doesn't make any common sense to me.
But more common model for people who are companies that are a bit behind is you're actually paying support contracts from other companies, let's say Red Hat, precisely because you're not willing to go through the code of the project you're using. You're not willing to or capable of fixing the issues and so on and so forth. You're paying often significant amount of money to Red Hat because they will tell you, use this, don't use that, because that something is not yet ready. This is battle tested. They're giving you advice. They're giving you stability. They're fixing problems for you. They're answering your calls. It's perfectly legit. Then there is nothing wrong with that. You just need to understand whether you're doing one or you're doing the other or neither. But again, you cannot scream at people from Log4j for, first of all, vulnerabilities are found in everything, not only for Log4j, first of all. Second, for all I care, if nobody from the community, as far as I know, there is no commercial entity behind Log4j, if nobody fixed that issue for half a year, I still wouldn't complain about it. It's their right not to lift a finger. They have no obligations towards anybody to fix that. I mean, I think that now it's fixed, right? But they could have said, no, I'm actually enjoying family time, extended vacation.
And that's not abnormal for many open source projects. It's like, I'll look at it when I look at it. I think about the companies, though, that say, well, I can't afford support contracts. We're running really lean and we need all these fixes now. And to me, that's just being a freeloader. And if your business can't afford support from people that know whatever that project is the best, I question if you even have a viable business.
Exactly. Now, let's say that we change the subject. Let's say that you are producing some physical product, toys, and you say, hey, I cannot invest in transportation. I cannot transport those toys from factories to stores. Then you have no business. You either buy those trucks, employ truck drivers to take them out of your factory into your consumers. That's option number one. That would be equivalent to contributing. Or you can assemble those trucks by yourself. That would be equivalent of not using open source, building everything yourself, which is not going to happen. Or you can contract a third-party company that will do the transportation for you. You cannot say, I cannot afford to transport goods from my factory to consumers. You cannot say that. You just need to figure out which of the models to transport those goods fits you the best.
But the sad thing is a lot of people pick that second one to where they're going to build the trucks from raw iron ore.
I mean,
melt it down. It's like,
Amazon is doing that. They're building drones that are supposed to fly to your home and bring you goods. Now, I'm going to ignore whether that's going to happen or not. Imagine that it will, right?
But they didn't do that day 1. They didn't even do that day 5. This is day 1,000.
Exactly. I mean, and why are they doing that? Because they probably figured out that none of the existing solutions fit their needs. And that's the important thing. That's what I've been telling people all the time. Hey, if you want to start a new project, first of all, you never start a project from scratch. That would mean that you don't use a single library in your application or whatever it is, but semi from scratch. You better solve the problem that nobody else solved. Otherwise, you're ridiculous. And that's the sad part of, hey, I'm building a CI/CD pipeline solution. Will it be better than what's already in the market? No. Or you think it will, but most likely it will not, simply because unless you want to put a lot of people into it, or you have a brilliant idea that nobody thought of before, it's not going to be better. It's going to be a waste of time. Building a new Jenkins or building a new Kubernetes, unless you're onto something really radically better, it's going to be a waste of time.
I had this happen to me when I was doing a lot of iOS development back in the late 2000s. Guy comes to me and says, hey, I've got an idea. It's the perfect thing for iOS. I went, oh, okay, great. I want you to take the calculator from Palm OS and put it on iOS. I went, well, there's already a calculator there. It's like, yeah, I know, but I don't like that one. I want the calculator from Palm OS. I went, they do the same thing. He says, yeah, I know, but I like the one on Palm OS better. He says, in fact, I don't want just the calculator. I want everything that works on Palm OS on iOS. I went, have a nice day. Because that was just dumb. Why would I want to do that?
But you are silly now, Darin.
That I had the conversation to begin with?
No, I would have done that for $50K. That's cheap, right? I mean, to transfer everything, that would be cheap. Sure, $50K, right? And for $50K, I would invest $2K to buy a couple of Palm devices and say, here you go. That's $48K pure profit.
But he wanted it on his iPhone, so it didn't work out that way. He wanted all the Palm stuff on his iPhone. Okay, then
it would cost a bit more, because then I would need to ship Palm devices to China to put them into a different package to look like.
But that's day 0. What would day 5 look like for that? How would you maintain that?
Of course.
No. When you start to hear the ridiculousness of what some companies will do and propose, you start to understand just how out of touch they are. So the link to Filippo's post is down in the show notes. So I highly recommend you go ahead, read through that, and the very last paragraph of that. Go ahead and give him a follow on Twitter just to see what he's talking about more in the future. But what does your company do? Is the core of your company, you're going to go melt all the iron ore and build your own trucks?
Show me a company that is in the IT industry, and every company is, that doesn't bet big on open source. The question is only whether you're aware of it or not. Servers, are they Linux servers? Were you running that something? Yes? Open source. Are you using programming language? Open source. So I don't know, are there not open source programming languages that people use?
There probably are.
Maybe.
I can't name them, though.
Okay, so there might be, right? And then libraries in those languages, are they also not open source? It's impossible not to use open source. And it's impossible not to have the vast majority of what you're building based on open source.
The question is, are you part of the solution or part of the problem in keeping open source sustainable?
You know what's the funny part? Where people say, no, we don't want open source. That's why we're not using Ubuntu, we're using RHEL.
If you could see us right now, I am shaking my head, sadly, a little tears coming out of the corner. Every day of the week. Well, okay, not every day, but weekly, yeah. We're using Red Hat. We're not using open source. Again, if you could see us, I'm squinting in my face right now. It just makes no sense.
What that really means is that we are using open source, but we want to pay somebody to curate that open source or to provide support, provide commercial features on top of open source, and we're willing to pay. That's perfectly legit and fine. You just need to be aware that that's what it is.
So what do you think about this? Head over to the Slack workspace, go over to the podcast channel, and look for the title is Open Source Sustainable. We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.